We must look back at precisely who we are in order to determine who we represent. Proverbs 4, verse 7. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and in all thy getting, get understanding.
Listen, with inaccuracy, they try to get at me, but can't even fathom what it takes to be like a nigga like me.
This is Literary Interest as of late. I am Sam Young-Bey, your host, and as always, welcome to the show. On this episode, we'll be thumbing through eight. My own understanding of the Moorish science movement initially came from listening to my uncle John Foster Bey. Even as a boy, I was always inspired with his historical knowledge and the brilliance of his social analysis. I took every opportunity to listen to him, since my public school education usually left me feeling much like the fictional Othello, a bit contemptuous of my alienated African self. Fortunately, the conversations with my uncle made me even more comfortable with my African ancestry and increasingly obsessed with learning more. Page 1. Moors Influenced History. The Moors of Africa profoundly altered and influenced the course of Western and European history more than any other non-European people. Page 2. Moors in government and Moors known to be Africoid. First, African Moors served the governments of early Christian European nations, a historical fact. Second, marriages and other unions between Europeans and Africans, historically accurate. Most important, Elizabethan Brits and many other peoples of that era clearly understood that Moors were phenotypically Africoid, so-called black people. Page 6. Little reason to embrace Africanity. Very few organizations in the history of the U.S. have sought to give African peoples in the Americas a historical reason to love and embrace their Africanity. Page 11. European effort to confuse the African American and or Moorish mind. Besides Othello, the children of Iago also inundate the historical record. Iago's progeny represents those European men and women who have sought to undermine African peoples by distorting and or hiding historical truths in the interest of ego and political power. Existing efforts to skip over Moorish cultural influences upon European institutions deny the Africanity of the illustrious Moors, and deny the Moorish and or African presence in the pre-Columbian Americas, and profoundly explains of Iago-like efforts to create confusion in the African American and or Moorish mind, with deliberate misrepresentations of the Moorish identity. Page 12. Terms for subjugation of African and or Moors. Understand that, properly speaking, the terms Negro, colored, and black are found throughout Western history as pejorative references for subjugated African peoples, peoples whose nationalities were deliberately as well as unknowingly denied. Page 13. U.S. leaders dims consciousness through pigmentocracy. If it is true that the U.S. has always possessed people of every nationality whose characters have displayed kindness and humane integrity, it is also true that the country's leadership in business, education, and politics has often dimmed the consciousness of the masses in the interest of material wealth and psychological advantage. School curriculums as well as state and federal laws have customarily served the selfish interests of an overly materialistic European American male business elite. Robber barons, sweatshops, anti-African imagery on consumer goods, Jim Crow laws, and economically motivated lynchings are just a few historical examples of the actions taken by a greedy oligarchy. Even the deliberate absence of the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in the textbooks of segregated black students stands as another of many historical examples of how the U.S. political leaders sought to warp American minds of every hue. Such acts would enforce the creation and maintenance of a pigmentocracy rather than a true democratic republic. The chief beneficiaries of such diabolical acts would undoubtedly be men of predominant European descent. Consequently, American academies possess a very large canon of pseudoscientific arguments claiming the inherent genetic inferiority of blacks, Negroes, and coloreds. The voluminous work Anti-Black Thought 1993, edited by John D. Smith, is one excellent source which reveals the considerable effort even to try to prove the inferiority of specific African peoples, particularly those who have been customarily labeled as blacks or Negroes. In contrast, historical investigation shows that the oligarchy of Anglophone European American males chose the term white to indicate their political and social privileges. White was also a term which denoted godliness and the right of divine authority. So in spite of the multinational origins of the United States, such men would seek to ensure that American society and institutions reinforced a popular myth of inherent supremacy among persons of predominant European origin. Page 14, Western and/or European is Christian. Christianity also stands as the primary religious component of the Western paradigm and the European world. In fact, to be truly Western is to be a Christian. Yet one of the greatest historic ironies is that neither the man called Jesus Christ nor the theology and/or religion which he preached came from the Western or European world. Jesus was a Sephardic Jew, an Asiatic, from the Eastern world, geographically and culturally linked to both East Africa and Near Asia. Page 27, African Chronicler from 365 through 408 of the Common Era on Moors relation. The 14th century chronicler Claudian indicates that Moors were directly related to the early Negritians and Ethiopians. To Claudian, North African Chronicler 365 through 408 of the Common Era, Moors, Ethiopians, and Negritians, that is Negroes, were one of the same. He speaks of the Moors who dwell beside the waters Gir, most famous of the rivers of Ethiopia, that overflows its banks as if it had been another Nile. The Gir referred to here is the Negir, or Niger River. Pages 92 through 93. European servant status restricted. In a Virginia law of October 1748, Act 9, English authorities have taken steps to make designated European Christians ineligible for servant status in the colonies. This 1748 Act implies that up until that time, anyone, including Englishmen, could carry servant status within the American colonies. But now this 1748 Act specifically declared in Virginia, no Negro, mulatto, Indian, although a Christian, or any Jew, Moor, Mohammedan, shall purchase any Christian white servant, emphasis added. This act indicates that Moors, Jews, and Muslims were residing in the British colony of Virginia in significant enough numbers to warrant the passing of laws to restrict them. It again shows that there was a recognizable distinction between Moors and other Mohammedans, Sunni Muslims. Page 102, 103, Treaty between the U.S. and Morocco. Shortly after her independence in 1783, the USA failed to pay the necessary tithes and/or taxes to Morocco for use of her waters. The U.S. also failed to answer Moorish emissaries, and the Moroccans responded by detaining a U.S. ship in 1784. This immediately got American attention. Consequently, the U.S. government paid the tithes, taxes, and formally made the Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Ship Signals the United States and Morocco on June 28 and July 15, 1786. It was drawn up in Morocco under the Honorable Thomas Barclay, the U.S. agent to the Moroccan court. Article 21 of the treaty between the U.S. and Morocco illustrates one of the benefits which Moors and U.S. citizens were granted by virtue of the treaty. It states, if a citizen of the United States should kill or wound a Moor, or on the contrary, if a Moor should kill or wound a citizen of the United States, the law of the country shall take place and equal justice shall be rendered, emphasis added. In short, U.S. citizens in Moorish dominions were to be under the protection of jurisdiction of imperial Moorish authorities, and recognized Moors in U.S. territories were to be under the protection and jurisdiction of the U.S. federal government. Imperial Moorish authorities also understood that recognized Moorish subjects were not legally subject to enslavement. Only fugitives, prisoners of war, non-subjects, and criminals were legally susceptible to sale in the trade. Why I chose this book, I had more than enough comments on TikTok to really warrant me choosing this book right here. A lot of people are asking, who are the Moors? You know, are we Moors? Da, 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 da. But I bought this book about a year after actually watching lectures from Dr. Jose Pimienta-Bey, and also it was it's a YouTube channel I subscribe to, Mexum. They have Dr. Pimienta-Bey. He goes over a lot of his own personal research on that channel, breaking down a lot more information than what he has compiled in this book. And he has other literary works. And he, along with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, are foremost on the subject of Moors. At least I believe they are. I've been digging into both of them pretty heavily for about 2 years, so yeah. That's why. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, subscribe to my channel. Let me get a like down here so YouTube will know what's going on. And hit that notification bell also. I mean, leave a comment too.
In the midst of all the fury, with infernos blazing hot, 10 toes in, still I stand, not consumed with all the fire. Like the Hebrew boys drunk before the viceroys, you raise the temper high. You still see me roaming freely, dancing in all of the light.